Always forget to press the right
Yes,
button.
you've done it. Oh.
Here we go. So now hopefully you can all see the slides from the beginning. As Catherine says, there'll be a breakout room, but I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts at various parts of the presentation. My slides are quite busy because I like to put lots of ideas on them to think around. So don't feel like you have to take everything that's on every slide. It's just to kind of tell a visual story as we go. So the presentation will cover two things. It will look at why it's important to design for neurodiversity and how we design, communicate and lead projects through inclusive design. What I would say is there's lots of opinions. That's what makes this conversation fascinating. So do let me know afterwards or through Catherine if you see anything differently. This isn't the only way to approach the subject. So the first part is just a quick recap of what I understand by neurodiversity. That it's a biological fact, that our brains are different. We all have sensory and information processing differences. This means that we move, communicate, think and work differently, and there is no one normal kind of brain. My heating's quite noisy in the background, so if you hear the boiler growling, that's what the noise is. So it's really important, I think, to think of neurodiversity as an umbrella term that's about everyone. And then these are stats that I've seen out there, that 10% of people are dyslexic, that 1 in 7 of us have some of the conditions that are most common. But there are many types of neurodiversity, and I work in town planning. Sometimes we will do special schemes that are designed for dementia or for different types of conditions specifically. But when we get talking about neurodiversity, we could also be talking about things like OCD or the menopause. So it's a very broad and multi-dimensional topic, and I think it's important to see inclusive design for neurodiversity in the broadest sense. And these slides refer to what some people call our spiky profile. So where we have strengths and challenges in different areas, it's sometimes shown in a graph like this. Sorry, my slides are automatically changing, so I'll try and keep up with them. But I think it can help for us to think of it on the image on the left, where our experience can change and have many multidimensional aspects to it. So a key part of this is sensory processing, and all the senses are really important. So as well as what we hear and what we taste. I'm just going to pause the slides for a second, because otherwise it's going to go too quickly. So maybe if we just have a few minutes to think about our sensory processing while I just fix the slides. Catherine, could I just pass back to you for a second? Because otherwise it's going to go too quickly, I think.
So, Jennifer, are you asking people to just think about their senses?
Yes.
And senses that they think they use most? So if you can, shall we go back to stop the share then and just go back to the gallery? Is that possible?
Yes, I didn't realise I was still sharing, sorry. So I can go back to this slide here just for a second. Can you see that one, Catherine? And
sorry, Jessica?
I think I've stopped it rattling through the slides. I've turned off the timing. So hopefully now we can take it a bit slower.
Well, it is useful for people to think about that, isn't it? You know, the senses that they use most. Has anybody got any ideas about the senses they use most?
I was going to say maybe like sight, perhaps, or hearing as well?
Hearing, yeah.
Yeah,
Depends upon the individual. And, you know, sometimes learning profiles can shed some light on that. But there's also a fourth learning profile, which it turns out that I have, which is the read-write learning profile, which means that you want to read things first and make notes, writing it down. Basically, that's how you learn.
I think that's really important, Adrian. I put the little brain in the top because I think some people do take on board information in those ways as well.
And I scored 27 out of 30 on that when I was finally tested on at the age of, what, 53 or something. And I previously had just done kinesthetic, visual and auditory, and I tended to go more or less down the middle of all three, with possibly very slightly more visual, you know, and it wasn't really valid because and that's the problem, they almost never test for the fourth profile, which is the read-write profile, which it turns out, you know, 27 out of 30 have that pretty massively.
It's interesting that the chats, you've got a lot of response as well. You know, people are saying hearing, smell. I mean, I would say verbal and visual. So I think what's coming out of this conversation is how important it is for us to be self-aware about how we actually take in information and gather knowledge. What's our way of doing it? Should we get back to the slides?
Yeah, I'll carry on now that they're not racing so quickly, but yeah, hopefully having this idea that the senses can change and that it depends what situation you're in as to what you're most conscious of. The next slide is about information processing. I'm not an expert in this area at all, but I just put it in there to think about when we have the sensory information, our brains probably process it in different ways as well, so you won't have the same reaction from two different people. And then that leads as well to executive functioning, which we've had really brilliant presentations on before. But I think it's important to think of these three things. So the sensory processing, information processing, and then each of us as well thinking about our executive functioning, and that can include things like hyperfocus or effort and getting started on tasks. So I'm just rattling through these to set the scene, and this really interested me, the definition of disability as being a mismatched interaction. So Microsoft talk about this, and they say that if we see disability as a mismatched interaction between features of a person's body and features of the environment where they live, then that can get us into design thinking and how we can respond to disability as designers. And that contrasts to the Equality Act definition that I've put up here as well. But for this presentation on inclusive design, I like to think about it as mismatched interactions. And we don't have time to have a discussion today, but I think in our group, different people have different feelings about the word disability and maybe thinking about it as mismatched interactions.
Well, we had compulsory training as part of being members of what was then the British Standards Institution Disability Expert Reference Group on universal design triangle, etc. And because it's saying you've got to apply that, and that's quite right, and that links into the UN Disability Treaty, which specifically references universal design. Domestic legislation in the UK doesn't. It does, for example, in Portugal, where I now live.
Is it okay if we have this discussion a bit later?
Yeah, we might get a bit detailed. I'll get to the bit where we don't all need to be designers, but hopefully talking about design as a process where we design products or services or the physical environment to be as usable for as many people as possible, and remembering that includes groups that are traditionally excluded. So this is one of those normal graphs where often in the past designers have been looking just at the majority, the people in the middle, and it can be these people that are often excluded that get forgotten. But sometimes in the design process, we at the edges can provide really valuable input that benefits everybody. And so design thinking is about why we make things, what we make, who makes it, who uses it, and how it's made. And it's really important to have diversity and neurodiversity within the design team to make sure that we are considering all these factors and the sensory experience that we talked about before. So I've put a slide in here as well about dyslexic thinking. You may have caught the conversations recently about dyslexic thinking having a definition and people celebrating dyslexic thinking. And there are parallels to design thinking. So often in design professions, you will find a large number of dyslexic people because it's a sort of problem solving mindset. So that was really just setting the scenes about neurodiversity while we move into neurodiversity inclusion by design. And I'll split this into 3 parts, but the main part will be the design of places and environmental.
I think that we're still on the information processing model slide.
Oh, that's strange. That's not what I can see.
No, but that's what I can see.
Bear with me, Catherine. Sorry, there's a bit of technical difficulties. I have a new computer in my new job and I think it's causing a few issues. Can you see part 2 now?
Because just all sensory processing, it's now not showing anything that I can see.
Bear with me. Oh, sorry about this because it worked perfectly when Catherine and I were testing it out earlier. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to try it again.
I'd keep the slides down the side so you can click on each slide. Maybe that's the way to do it.
Yeah, we might need to, I might need to do that and just share it. Yeah, bear with me. I will share it in.
Otherwise, I can share it for you. I have got one of your presentations.
This should work. It will just take a minute to open, I think.
Don't stress about it. It happens to us all. I'm gonna say we all experience this trauma of like, why won't you work, you silly machine? So
funny because for once I actually got my slides done really early, about a week ago. And so I'll see if interesting.
Would you like me to share?
Yes, Catherine, I might need you to.
Okay, I'll do that now.
Yeah.
So if you stop the, oh, you've done it.
Has it worked?
Yeah, you're on. Now you're at the front.
I will race through the slides that you didn't get to see earlier. Executive functioning, design thinking, dyslexic thinking, and now we're at part 2. Can everybody see part 2?
Can we just go from, can we just slowly, just a second at a time on each slide that we missed? So
Okay.
you
So I don't want anyone to feel ill as I just switch back through.
Not too fast, yeah.
Yeah, so let's pause here.
So don't speak, just go through the slides one by one, the ones that we've missed.
It's about 4 slides.
From the information processing slide, that one.
This one. And then
yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Executive functioning.
And then the next one.
And this is disability as a mismatched interaction.
And you talk about the Equality Act quite reasonably. And this is from the World Health Organization report on disability in 2011. And then the next slide.
And then this is designing not for the middle, but for everybody to be usable by as many people as possible. And that's inclusive design.
Okay, good.
And design thinking.
And you talked to this, and this is where you got to, wasn't it?
Yes, and then just to say that dyslexic thinking has a lot of parallels to design thinking. It's about problem solving, and you'll often find lots of dyslexic people in design teams. So we're now on part 2, and hopefully part 2 will go more smoothly, starting with the design of places. So the main reason for doing this talk today is that the British Standards Institute, as Adrian has said, have published a Design for the Mind design standard, and it's the first of its kind because it involved people who put the design standard together who have different conditions. They experience sensory and or neurological processing differences. And the commitment of the standard was to make sure that all users are considered in how we design the built environment. So that can be homes, and it can be workplaces. It can also be public squares and relevant to a whole variety of built environment settings. And the standard helps meet legal and social obligations. We talked about the Equality Act earlier. There's also the dementia friendly charter that's used in London. So it has many uses, and I'll just get into a little bit more about all the factors that are considered. So it's a design document that has a lot of technical detail in it, but it I think is relevant to this group because it ties back to what we were talking about the senses earlier. This is an image here of a BBC building in Cardiff, where they've tried to build in sensory design into their headquarters there. And that means thinking about all these factors that are on the slide. So it includes lighting, flooring and finishes. It can include access to nature, which came out of the discussions as being really important for well-being. Also things like odour, drafts, the thermal comfort. Often something that can disrupt people is the temperature, and whether they notice the impact of the temperature on them as well. So sometimes I find that you can get too hot, but not realise it for a delayed period of time. So you might think, oh, why am I getting agitated? And it can take a little bit of time to realise it's the temperature. I think layout, navigation, signage and clarity of spaces really plays out in a transport setting. Particularly I find in the underground stations, getting lost regularly is a sort of navigation point, and when you combine it with the other sensory aspects as well, it can have a real impact on your ability to move through a space. There's also transitions, which is moving from one type of space to another. How safe you feel, how familiar you are in the space, and as well how it's managed and whether there are unwritten rules. So if you arrive at a new building, maybe you've got an interview and you're meeting them at the desk, there can often be some unwritten rules that aren't clear as to how to use the building. And that can again affect your experience. So the design for the mind can be encapsulated with this drawing here, which is bringing all those multidimensional factors together into themes. And the themes that have been identified are control and clarity. And I'll be interested when we do our breakout rooms about the theme of calm as well, and whether what is important is calm or having the choice of calm. So I think it's not probably that we all want to be in a library all the time, but no matter where we are, we want the ability to access calm space if we need it. And it depends what we're doing at the time, if we are with our friends or if we're in a work setting. All of these factors, we might be looking for different things and be affected in different ways. So I will move to another slide, which I've put all the factors on the left. You've already seen them. And this is a sensory design room that has been put into a space in a school. It was a spare space that the school had, and they worked with the children to talk about what they'd like to see, and this is what they came up with. So I put this here because it maybe you might think that it contrasts calm in the traditional sense of what we think a calm space is, but they've really thought about the textures, the lighting and the sound in that space. And because it's used as a breakout space, this is what they sort of came up with, but it also shows the importance of involving users in the design. So that space might not be appropriate in another setting for another group of people, but it really worked here. And then this is an example, the next one that my friend sent me. This was a meeting that she was sent to. She's an autistic friend, and she found it really overwhelming because the wallpaper was really jazzy. The floor had patterns over it. It had sort of quite striking lighting, and the idea she'd been invited to that meeting to have a formal discussion, again, a sort of setting where she hadn't been there before. And it really influenced her ability in the meeting as well, to feel comfortable in that space. But it's something that might affect different people in different ways. So Catherine, that's where I thought we might move to a breakout room. And if everybody could think about spaces that work well for them, and that could be in a work setting, or you could think out and about if you're out shopping or trying to navigate through transport. But I will hand over to you to set up the breakout rooms, Catherine.
Is that all right to stop the share now then?
Yes,
Okay.
hopefully we won't have the same problems.
Okay.
Thank you for bearing with me, everybody.
Well, you've done brilliantly so far, and thank you. Is everybody okay with breakout rooms?
Yeah, how long are we doing it for? Just for a bit of
How long do you want to do it for?
well, I think Jennifer,
5 minutes, do you think? Rose, does that work?
no, you say. I just want to be aware so we know when.
I'd say 5 minutes, and we're about halfway, we're at least halfway through now. So if anyone needs to get a cup of tea or anything, but yeah, 5 minutes for the breakout, and then we'll come back and talk about spaces that we like.
Okay, so I've put down 5 minutes for the breakout rooms. I'm now going to assign people. We've got, right, I'm going to assign 3 groups between 4 or 5 people, and I'm going to put an advocate or a WFTA trustee in each of the groups, okay? That's the best thing to do. So I'm starting to assign people. If you've got 5 minutes, you can leave the room whenever you want. I'll be waiting outside the rooms, okay? So the first room is Adrian, Andre, Andrew, and Becky, advocate. Okay. The second room is Dave, James, Jennifer, and Linda Pett. The third room is Lois and Maddie and Michelle. That's okay. And the fourth room is Marcia, Rose and Simon. All right. And when we come back, I think what you want, Jennifer, is people to briefly say what they think. Yeah.
Catherine, it's Dee here. I don't think you mentioned my name.
You should be there, Dee. I don't know why you're not. Dee, yes, you've been assigned. Yes, you've been assigned to room 2, Dee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with James and Jennifer and Linda Petts in good company. I'm going to now open the rooms. All right, so you've got groups of either 4 or 3. And the question is, what works well for you in terms of an environment?
Thanks, Catherine.
Don't appear to be in any room.
Adrian, you haven't joined a room.
Well, I tried to join. I pressed the button.
Oh, right. Let me just move you. There's. I wondered whether you'd actually decided not to join. We've got.
No.
We've only got less than a minute, so I think it's probably best.
I mean, I've been repeatedly trying to get into the room.
Have you? Because I
Yes.
certainly put you in a room, and I thought you decided that you didn't want to go. I think
No.
we should just leave it now because it's not. There's barely a minute left.
I mean, I couldn't hear anything, and pressed a button, and still couldn't hear, and it kept on booting me back to the main room. I kept on trying to go back in.
I think there must be something technically at your end, you know, because you've had problems entering things before.
I've never had a problem entering a room like that.
Okay.
On Zoom.
I certainly did, and you're in front of me as being part of that room, but it just says Adrian Wyatt not joined, and I thought you'd made that decision not to join, and I didn't want to query it if that was your decision.
No,
Okay.
I was trying to join.
All right, so time is up now. So let me just have. Do you want to close? I'm going to close breakout rooms now. Close all rooms.
No.
They'll all be coming back anyway.
I'll just contribute in the main session, I guess.
Yeah.
If I can.
No, well, I'm sorry about that. They'll all be coming back very shortly. We hope.
Yeah.
Can only see an A, can't see you, Adrian. Hi there, Jennifer. Adrian wasn't able to join a room.
Oh no, and Adrian's got loads of expertise in this area.
Never mind. I'll just, contribute at the.
Yeah, Dee didn't get a chance to talk in our breakout group either because maybe they were a little bit quick. I feel like this is a learning session for me, Catherine, and I think maybe next time a few more minutes.
So they're all coming back now. So Jennifer, in room 1, you had Andre, Andrew, and Becky.
Could we go around and just hear from people, just if you have anything to kind of share with everybody, because I think we had a really good discussion in our group.
Yeah, so for group 1, I was just describing kind of my experiences of what I don't like. So in terms of the kind of old-fashioned fluorescent lighting, from a sensory perspective with my Asperger's, it's an absolute nightmare. And also actually having, when we have team meetings together, we go to kind of the same kind of place. And also we were talking about, Becky and I were talking about from a dyslexia dyspraxia point of view of actually being able to have, a definitive space when you're working as well. So I work remotely and having, all your equipment in one place, so you've got it set up to meet your specific needs. And yeah, I mean, that was pretty, and then we were talking, Andre was talking about her experiences of kind of having a lot to deal with, the handover, but maybe she probably can describe it a bit better than I can, because her job seemed very, very overwhelming, an 11-hour shift.
We felt for you. We are definitely feeling for you. Oh, you're still on mute.
I hope you
I hate that. You automatically go back to mute, and I'm like, oh, talking to myself. I suppose, yeah, I only do twice a week, but I do 2 11-hour shifts as a receptionist, and anything can happen during the day, between deliveries, whatever. But when I'm trying to do a handover, I try and do it during the day, but sometimes that doesn't happen. But also at the end of the evening after 11-hour shift with my dyspraxia, my typing just goes all over the place. And then I try and do dictate, and the dictate doesn't understand me. So I'm really struggling the last hour trying to get my notes into like the handover sheet and everything else I have to do, and then people coming and distracting me, which obviously is part of my job. So yeah, I suppose it's distraction. We all said distraction. We found it quite a difficult thing because I'd lose my whole train of thought and I have no idea where I was. I lose my cursor. I don't know where I was typing. So yeah.
And we probably don't have a long time, but maybe Marcio, if we just go through a couple of the different groups quickly for another couple of minutes.
We were group 4, so I'll just list some of the things just quickly. So we said there's lots of variables, but it can be around pressure, temperature, eating, sleep, and your working space environment. Maybe you need to have things blocked so you're not distracted, as it were. Color, sensitive to sound. I brought that in as well because my daughter's very sensitive to sound as someone who's neurodiverse, and she's going through exams at the moment, and any little thing, and smell as well. And then we've just got here light and natural light and sound and color. I hope that helps. If that's just a kind of list, I won't go into it, but that's the list of things that we talked about.
And then just a chance if anyone else wants to jump in. Otherwise we'll switch back to the presentation. Is there someone else that wants to say something?
Sure, the groups. Well, you had group 2, you had Dee, James and yourself, Jennifer and Linda.
Maybe Linda, if we just say a tiny bit, because that was really interesting about having, or James raised the idea of having a space.
Yeah, James talked about London, and he talked about finding refuges in London. And what was interesting is that we have the same, the V&A and the Welcome Centre. Some of the galleries there, the lighting is superb. I would also perhaps include the museum. I can't remember what it's called now. I shall move on. But we talked a lot about how a space needs to be comfortable, and how lighting needs to be considered, how the colour of the walls need to be considered, how privacy needs to be considered, how the room functions for you as a person. And I think we found ourselves sort of thinking about environments that nurtured rather than challenged. And James and I both said that we thought the Excel Centre was awful. And I was shocked to find that they had an autism show. How about that? An autism show at the Excel Centre, which I probably think is the worst possible environment for such an event to happen. So there you go. Sorry about that. British Museum is what I was thinking of. Sorry, I'm tired. COVID's done my head in.
I think the learning from our group was it's always good if you're out and about and you might get overwhelmed to know that there's somewhere that you can head.
True. I possibly said a little bit too much, and I would like to invite. Would Dee like to chip in with anything?
I was going to say, Dee, if you're organising events, do you bear these kind of things in mind as well? Because it's tricky to balance lots of different people's views sometimes.
Yeah. Well, for me, I was saying noise, background noise, and lighting is very important. And to answer your question about events, I have been thinking with the event that I want to do, Dyslexia Wellness Fun Day. To be honest, I think the main event is going to be very busy, which is not going to, it's I don't know. Anyway, but I have I'm hoping to have like a room where people can sit in, and it will be calm and quiet there, and people can just kind of go there to chill for a bit. But yeah, that's
okay. I have put in the chat the British Standards document on neurodiversity in the built environment, and it's actually a free standard. For those who know about standards, sometimes they can be hundreds, if not thousands of pounds, but this one is actually free. Yes, you do have to register on the BSI website and put in a little personal details, but it is a free download. Unfortunately, for copyright reasons, I can't download and distribute, but for anybody who wants it, they can get it from that link without too much difficulty.
Thank you for that, James. And that brings us nicely on, because it's the British Standard that really got me thinking about doing this presentation today, because it's a really big deal that we have all these considerations captured in a public document, as you say. And hopefully, if my slide sharing is working again, I just thought it was useful. There's quite a lot of text on the next slides, but that's just to summarize some key points really of how can we take the design learning from the British Standard and from examples of spaces that work for us and bring them into how we communicate and how we work every day. So this is a slide about communication, events and meetings, and it's thinking about before the event, during the event and afterwards. Have you thought about whether people will know what will happen? Can you design in adjustments, things that are thought of as adjustments that people need to request, like having a calm space? Can you design that into your plan? Think about all the sensory experiences, and in planning, trying to think what conflicts there could be. So maybe you have someone who is really chatty and really wants to socialize, but you know that other people in the group want to have quiet. Is there a way that you can manage that situation so that you're balancing different people's needs? And asking for feedback can be a way to do that for your next event, so that you're always trying to improve. And then the next slide is about inclusive design in documents. So with public sector websites, there are regulations which make sure that accessibility is built in. And that means there are lots of digital web designers who are advancing kind of the practice of what makes a clear and accessible reading material. And there are posters out there like this one that really simply puts down some key points for documents for dyslexia, for example, not having big walls of text, and making sure that you don't use too much underlining or italics, which are harder to read. So it's just, I'll rattle through these because people probably want their dinner fairly soon, but it's just to say that we can bring inclusive design into how we prepare our documents. And I did try and do it with this presentation, although it hasn't necessarily worked out. And then bringing that together, it's the process of communication. So if you're putting together documents, are you thinking about involving neurodiverse voices? Are you thinking about the order of the information as you put it together? And making sure that there's choice for people to find what they need, and you're considerate to the senses, and again that you're asking for feedback so that you're always listening and learning for next time. And then that brings us on from communication to how we run projects generally. And if you're not, I'm a project manager, but you might be able to bring this finding into different work environments. So the first thing is flexibility, and making sure that what you're asking people to do is what is necessary and what is suited to their skill set as well, because as this image shows, there is no point asking a fish to climb a tree, but it can feel like that sometimes if we're not thinking about the individual and we're just treating everybody the same. So this is where the values and attitudes and beliefs kick into how we work. So for some people, they feel really strongly that everybody should have the same, and that that's equality and that's fairness. But what this presentation has tried to do is to emphasize, if all of our brains are different, then we all have slightly different needs, and that can change over time. So we need to try, if we can, to build in flexibility and to think about what we consider fair, as people having the same ability to participate and not being disadvantaged because we may have only designed our process or our approach for one narrow way of thinking. And that's where inclusive design comes into the governance and the way that we run our projects. And then this image here is just to talk about the kind of atmosphere that we're creating when we're working in teams, and how it feels to be excluded or segregated. I expect lots of people in this group have had that experience if you're in the minority, in the way that you think or the way that you're noticing your sensory experience. But sometimes it can be about integrating and bringing people in. But when you do that, are you trying to get everybody to feel and look and behave the same? Are you trying to get assimilation? Or is there a way of achieving inclusion and inclusive design where people can still have their different needs met, they can still be their different personalities, and that you're applying that flexibility that we talked about earlier, so that you aren't trying to kind of squeeze everyone into the same box. So we're getting to the end of the presentation. I just had some questions that I just wanted to read out, and then we'll go back to Catherine and the main room to have a conversation about inclusive design. So it's really with these themes of calm as a choice, so having somewhere calm to go to, clarity and control of spaces. How can we apply that as individuals? We might not all be designers or architects of spaces, but can we still set up the places and spaces that we spend a lot of time in to work for us and our sensory needs? Can we think about when we're communicating, whether it's in meetings or events and relationships, are we thinking about how different people are affected in different ways? And then, as we talked about in governance, can we try and be flexible and allow people to have their different needs met rather than a one-size-fits-all approach? And can we bring that, each of us, into our daily lives, rather than thinking it's kind of the job of the architect to change things? And then what's power do we have to recognise the value of neurodiversity inclusion? So do we think about the value of designing a framework, a sort of structure at the start when we're at work? Or do we just wait until issues arise and rely on individuals to kind of speak up and put their hands up if things need to change? So I'll probably leave it there and I'll hand back to you, Catherine. I will stop sharing.
Okay, well done, Jennifer. Can you put those questions in the chat, please?
Yes, I can do that.
That's a lot of questions for people to remember.
Yeah, and it was really just takeaways for people to think about. So I'll just spend a minute or so putting that into the chat. But it's really, can we bring inclusive design into our day-to-day lives? Okay, so you would like a debate about how we can have inclusive design within our everyday surroundings. Is that what you want? Yes, that's right. And
those three areas and those questions link up to your research, don't they?
Yes, so for a couple of years I've been trying to write a research project, and it's really thinking about whether inclusion, how do we embed inclusion, where we talked about where we're not looking for people to kind of assimilate and everyone be the same. We're trying to understand that everybody's different. Does that require neurodiversity advocates? Does it require individuals to become skilled in talking about the inclusive design process, and maybe have groups like this where we can talk about it, but also what's the role of everyone in the whole team as well? Can we achieve inclusive design if we don't take the whole team with us.
So let's just take this in two parts,
Yeah.
because you're a deep thinker, and I can, and you're juggling lots of thinking concepts here. So let's just take this in these two parts. The first part is that we are going to have a general debate now about our inclusive design and what does that mean for our day-to-day surroundings and everyday life. Jennifer has just put in the chat about these questions that are on her last slide that link completely to her research, and she would like people to get involved with a research survey that she's having, which is linked to these questions that are in the chat, and that survey will be circulated with this recording in about a week's time. So I'm speaking for you. I'm sorry, Jennifer, but
no, it's helpful. Thank you, Catherine.
So I know that she would really, really love it if you could be part of that research survey, because it will help her with her project that she's doing for her MA. But in the meantime, let's open this up to debate. And thank you so much for that brilliant presentation about inclusive design and the mind. But let's open this up for debate in terms of how we as individuals, and actually as a collective, because we are a collective now of neurodivergent, amazing people, how do we apply inclusive design in our day-to-day surroundings? Let's open that up, shall we? And perhaps shall we go to, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, is Simon still with us? Yeah, and I don't
yes,
mean,
yeah, I am. Yeah.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, and you can tell me to go away, Simon. But you are in the most amazing environment, the V&A, where you work, which is all about creative concepts and design. So let's hear from you if you don't mind.
Sure. It's sort of interesting, actually. I think I heard Linda mention the V&A as being having some nice spaces with some good lighting. I mean, and so I was quite interested to know where they are. I've worked at the V&A for 12 years, and I had a real issue with sort of back of house sort of office spaces that I discussed with Marcia and Rose. That I had a real problem that that they're Victorian, drafty. The windows don't open properly. I shouldn't really probably be saying this, actually. And yeah, just not really designed for the modern workspace. But because it's a listed building, it's quite difficult to make changes. So I have been quite keen to improve the V&A in those aspects. But yes, it is an amazing building. But I think I don't wish to sound sort of pessimistic or negative about the space, but I think it needs to learn a lot about sessions like this. So yeah, I think and one of the things I've done is I am part of an ND network, staff network, that is hoping to initially to make things better for staff, but also that because the V&A is a a museum for art and design, to be able to sort of lead in this, which I don't think the museum is doing at the moment. So sorry to not sound positive from that point, but I think that it needs to be leading in this area, and I don't think it is at the moment. But I think it is learning, and it is on the agenda in some areas. Does that help?
Why? Sorry, we've got Joyce and then Linda. Why do you think it's not leading, Simon? Is it just about communication? Because I'm sure the will must be there. Is it not? Is it about the fact that people are not connecting well across the institution? We are recording.
Can I think about that question and maybe come back? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And you don't have to answer it either, okay? It's just an interesting point, isn't it? You know,
I mean, for example, you know, Jennifer was talking about the BBC Cardiff studios, and we did have the team that did that design to do a talk at the London Design Festival a few years back, and you know, I put that team in touch with the LDF London Design Festival organisers to sort of help start that debate in the museum. And you know, the curators came, and the museum was supposed to have an exhibition on disability and design this spring, but it was postponed, and I don't know why. Because of COVID. You know, I before COVID, I used to have much more direct contact with some of the curatorial teams there. In the last 2 years, you know, we're still sort of getting back to we're still working sort of, you know, 3 days a week, so I don't have that much contact as I did. A lot of people have left and changed. A lot of staff have changed, so there's certain aspects of that. Why I couldn't answer that question is because in some ways this isn't my day job. You know, I work in a commercial department, so you know, my job isn't to design spaces, you know, for neurodiverse people in museums. This is just something I'm sort of quite passionate about.
Oh, thank you very much. Really, that was very insightful. Thank you, Simon. Right, we're going on to Joyce now. Hi there, Joyce. You need to unmute yourself. Let's see if I can unmute you for you.
Okay. Hello?
Hey, you're there.
Okay. I'm sorry I didn't get to come earlier. All I was trying to my understanding is, like, so for instance, say everyone has contact with the floor who comes into an environment or a space. So the design of the floor is, the correct design of the floor is essential so that people don't get sensory overload. In answer to part of the question you asked about how do we cope in those kind of spaces as individuals, I don't know any of the systems or practicalities of how you do that. The only example I can give for myself would be to try to use skills that I've developed. So like, for instance, to calm me down, the sensory stuff of mindfulness and being in the present. And instead of, like, the floor is chaos and everyone's making noise, but instead of to think of it as noise, think of it as sounds. And then my brain kind of interprets it different because sound is more like music. Or so it's kind of not a threat. I know that's not exactly what you're kind of after, but also then thinking about when I've worked on accessible things as in the environment and transport, how making something accessible, inclusive, doesn't just help that one particular group, say people in wheelchairs, but helps a lot of other people. So therefore ensuring that our spaces and places that we build for our communities are exclusive and accessible to all should have the same result. Is that clear, everyone? Sorry.
Yeah, it is. And it's kind of like, if it doesn't work, you have to have a little personal strategy or something to do about it, don't you? But if we can get the design right, then it will make a big difference for a lot of people.
Yeah, because it makes a difference. Say like you're using that building and you're having a meeting, then the sensory overload of that floor impacts on how efficient you can be at that meeting.
And if you start giving the voice to people that understand that, loads of other people probably never noticed that the floor was bugging them or made a difference to them as well. They wouldn't be tuned into it, but it might still have an impact and influence things. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it's really important that we have a voice.
I don't know how you build that in when you're designing. I don't know what the...
Yeah, it's a kind of open question that I don't think we've got right just yet. Linda, maybe you've got the answer to that one.
It's a shame it's only guidelines again and not mandatory. Thank you.
Yeah, I just said to cap in, I just sort of wanted to say to Simon, what I use the V&A for is actually a distraction. I can immerse myself in a particular object and experience it. And I can close off the distractions. I can close off the noise and the people. I go when it's quiet, so I make a point of being there when it's quiet. But I can use it as a place to almost a mindful experience, really, in that I can just transport myself somewhere else. But of course, like in the British Museum, there are places to avoid, and there are things that you don't go and see because there's just too many people there. So you are all the time making cognitive choices about what you're going to do and how you're going to manage yourself in a public space. Because, when meltdowns happen and when you get distressed, it's difficult for people. And I particularly find, the London Underground to be an environment that is very, very stressful. And my poor daughter's had to hold my hand because I've got so upset. I've lived in London nearly all my life, and I know the tube, and all sorts of stuff has happened on the tube. But the environment, the lived environment, is so important. And I think when you go onto the Elizabeth line, the carriages are huge. There's air conditioning. You can breathe. So all of those factors come together to make it a much, much better experience. The thing for me is it doesn't go anywhere I want to go. It doesn't fit with the central line very well. So I've actually just gone on it because it's there. So I think as design moves forward from Victorian times, which was one size fits the very rich, to one size fits all, and actually trying to be inclusive, that's a very interesting timeline to follow. I don't have any answers. I can't create an environment that I feel happy in, even in my own home. I think the question that you asked about bringing your colleagues along with you is one that has sort of stuck in my mind, because I worked in an old Victorian police station. I had all of the issues that Simon was talking about, and as a dyslexic person, I had to work in a busy office. I couldn't use my assertive technology, all sorts of chaos. And I asked could somebody put a sign up so that at the end of the day, people knew where to put the key, because I couldn't remember where to put this bleep, bleep, bleep key. No, that will affect our environment. Conversations with people need to start at that point, and the managers need to be trained to take control and to say this is an inclusive environment, and to persuade people what inclusivity actually means. It was very difficult in this Victorian police station because you couldn't get in it if you were in a wheelchair. You literally couldn't get through the front door. So you were starting at nil point. I don't have any answers, but what I do think is that this needs to be included in conversations that happen at school, and then that will then bring a generation forward that can actually understand what is being said. because you get PC and woke thrown at you if you actually start talking about inclusivity in that way. People don't mean to be unpleasant or unkind, but if you're in that middle and it doesn't impact on you, or you don't think it impacts on you, what's the point? When you can get people to see that it might improve their lived experience, they might have a better time at work if the environment was managed better. And I think that might be a route going down.
Got something, Linda, you've got a response actually from Jennifer in the chat. Jennifer, you were saying something here to everybody in the chat.
Yeah, this is that second question really of, is it something that individuals can do? Do we need to have advocates and skilled individuals talking about neurodiversity? And then also, can we get the whole team involved? So Becky, you've had your hand up for a while, but I think it's just sort of, yeah, how can we create that change? Just as individuals, sometimes it can feel like it's exhausting and it's too much, but it also seems important to have the conversations.
Yeah, are you ready for me? I don't want to interrupt if we're not ready.
No, that's good.
No, I completely agree with what Linda and yourself said over that, because it is really difficult because people don't understand. That wasn't what I wanted to say, but I'll just chip in after what Linda just said, because people don't get it when you ask them to make changes, like in the office, because it doesn't affect them and it only affects a few. They think, well, we can't treat you separately, or we can't do that because that'll affect everybody else. And they don't see, it's a bit like the diagrams what you showed earlier. And to get people to change that mindset, that's the really difficult bit, because everybody talks, like I work for a big organization, and there's a lot of talk about inclusivity and we win awards, but actually getting people to do it, apart from the people who write to get the awards, is two very different things, very different. But my point I was going to say was about when you was talking about the design. I watched a really good documentary about a month or two ago now on IKEA and their design and how much effort they've put in. And it was Joyce that it reminded me of when she was saying about the floor and how the floor. Now, I'm notorious. Everybody knows I get lost everywhere, in the car, walking around, every hospital, pretty much everywhere. I am renowned for getting lost. I have to plan extra time, and I travel length and breadth at UK. I have to plan extra time every time I go anywhere, because I know I'm going to get lost in the car, and then when I get out of the car, I use my phone, I have print it out, I stop random people, and I'm still lost on a regular basis. But IKEA, I never lost in IKEA, because they've got the little arrows on the floor to guide me around. You look up, and every so often they've got a real clear line diagram, not all wiggledy-piggledy, just in one row, which makes it easier, with a dot coloured telling me where I am, how I need to get backwards, how I need to get forward. And it's specially designed, and the documentary was all about how the whole environment is catered, so you only walk, I forget how far it is, till you get a turn. There's always a turn. And it's carefully guided so you don't miss anything. And if you need to get past, there's some little shortcuts. Brilliant, really, really clever design. If other people took that up, less of us would be lost all the time, because it can't just be me that constantly gets lost.
Well, I think that must be very recent, actually, Becky, because I remember about 15 years ago in the East End, at my IKEA in the East End, I got horribly lost in IKEA. I found groups of people equally horribly lost, and we created a collective to try. It was unbelievable, actually.
Oh, at least you made some friends. See, every opportunity, there's always a silver lining.
So clearly they've got their act together now.
Yeah, no, they're definitely a lot better now. Yeah, it just gradually guides you through, so you can't get lost anymore. But hopefully.
Okay, I think we've got James next, and then Adrian.
Hi. Interesting talk so far. I will talk reverse up from some of the comments. I mean, if we're talking good design, good signage does help. However, I do remember a rather embarrassing incident in the Science Museum, which nearly got published in the New Scientist. They had produced these wonderful diagrams, and put the same diagram on both sides of the corridor. Can you spot the problem? They hadn't produced left-handed and right-handed versions of this. Therefore, to exit the Science Museum, I ended up having to go via the basement. I just got so embarrassingly lost. Anyway, okay. Yes, there was comment about whether we need experts. Yes, we do need experts who properly understand, who can then properly advocate and give the proper rounded information, and rather than people just speaking about their experience about themselves. And in fact, I am currently taking issue with a national organization who sometimes use volunteers too much. I won't say too much, but Catherine knows exactly what I'm referring to. And Catherine, would you say it's fair to say it's a work in progress?
Haven't had any responses, have we?
No. So I wonder whether I've hit a sore point or whether we've all just ended up in their spam box.
I think there's probably two parts to this again. One is that there's a lot of reorganisation going on, and two, might have hit a sore point, and I think about training.
Yes, and particularly I would say such training is particularly needed particularly when you're working for multinational organizations where things get lost in translation, particularly between French and English. There is not a word for disability in French. It is all handicap, which has got connotations by itself. And equally, I have one large company, they rolled out a new jazzy website for internal communications for all. It was basically the internal landing page for this about 30,000 people work for this American conglomerate. And when I pointed out, they said the guy in charge of it told me on the phone, said, well, people have got their individual preferences. I so wish I had just hand that could have reached across the Atlantic and placed my hand firmly around both of his ears. Yes. So what I would say to Jennifer is an idea for your next set of slides. Have a walk from the Millennium Bridge up to St. Paul's and take a close look at the traffic and take a close look at the bollards. One which is a photo which I sometimes use when I make the point about visual. When you have a look at one of the bollards, and you will know these are cast iron bollards with small crosses on them. Have a look for the one where somebody made a mistake, and they actually mistake in the casting. So they've actually hand painted a red star. And most people wouldn't have spotted that, but when you walk past it, it's very obvious, and I think would make an interesting point for some of the people local to the city and say, you've walked past this so many times. How many times have you actually spotted it? Anyway, that's probably about enough of my ramblings. So.
Oh, that's a good point, James. It's about attention to detail as well, isn't it?
Yes, and when you go, I mean, you pulled up the spiky profiles at the start. I know my score on for visual processing is 14, which when you actually realize and understand unfortunately, I take the view a lot of psychologists are 40 statisticians. If they represented that information an awful lot better so people actually understood it, and you realize that you're in such a high percentage with regards to the rest of the population, it ends up being quite interesting. Anyway, I shall pass the ball back to Catherine.
And we will keep going with this issue about the communications with a certain organisation. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
There is some interesting comments in the chat. But Joyce is saying something here. One size doesn't fit all. Having input from a group of neurodivergent people would help. And it has to be at the beginning of a design, not added on after, through the process of inclusivity of design, and to include neurodivergent people in the project, in creating the product or the environment. Yeah, so that's a really good point from Joyce. Right, we're moving on to Adrian. Adrian. Hi there, Adrian. Got your hand up to say something.
Yeah, hi, sorry. Yeah, the key to all this is universal design, applying that process. So in particular, you need to try and make the default design as accessible to as many people as possible. So if you look at it like with the universal design triangle, you have the base of it, the default design, and arrows pointing upwards. You want to improve that. So for example, when it comes to slides and presentations using a gray background as a default rather than a white background, and that will make it accessible for over 95% of the population, without too much stress. There will be problems when you have clashes of access needs. So you have a small group of people who are partially sighted who really need a large contrast, but you have many more people who need a lower contrast. So what do? You have to have a default that is a lower contrast, and then some areas that are of higher contrast, so that both groups can access things, and alternative designs. And some people will at the end of the day still need personal assistance. That's the kind of final bit at the pinnacle of the universal design triangle, and that has to be supplied as well, because there are some people for whom there is no technology that exists in that particular situation that will enable them to do it on their own, to access somewhere. Otherwise you end up having to make like random choices between different needs, and that's what's really created a lot of the problems, because the Victorians may have been bad on wheelchair access, but they're actually very good on having low arousal environments, generally speaking, and that was then kind of lost by blinging things up, and that needs to be brought back. We need, in terms of things like offices and workplaces, we need wherever we can to have flexiplan, which is what I've always called it, as opposed to open plan and cellular offices. Open plan is the worst thing, generally speaking, but you may need some areas that have to be shared, have to be open plan for some purposes, but people need to have the ability to screen themselves off from it, and so on. And we also need to build in virtual access. The onus should be on the employer, for example, to prove that somebody actually needs to travel in physically to work, and that they can't do the job from a computer at home. And obviously there will be some things where that is the case, construction sites and so on. There will be noise and all the rest of it, and there will be some jobs that just won't suit different types of people. But there's a lot that we can do to improve it by applying that. And standards can only go so far, because standards are about consensus. That's the way it works with the BSI things, and they're very fiddly, because like they were supposed to, anything to do with access is supposed to consult the accessibility committee. We were never consulted on this neurodiversity in the built environment design, and they didn't revive the neurodiversity cognitive impairment access to the built environment task force, which I was on. So, you know, but apart from that, when you do regulations, you have to make decisions which are often majority-based decisions, and that's the weakness of the standards making process, that it's based around this idea of consensus. So they may train us on universal design, but they never actually apply it in any of the access standards, really, because they're not making decisions. Okay, we're going to choose this over that, which is what you have to do in terms of really applying universal design. So standards are one thing, but regulation needs to be tackled next, and that will include making some decisions that will mean that instead of, as has historically been the case, you've got people with a small group of blind and partially sighted people, their needs being catered for, and much bigger group neurodiverse people, their needs being ignored or crushed. You know, you integrate the two, and you tackle the neurodiverse needs first, because there's more of us.
Will you just give us the final point so that Jennifer can respond?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, what I would say is also, when it comes to neurodiversity, we should remember there's a tendency to just talk about developmental neurodiversity, but there are many different types of neurodiversity, and so we should be thinking more in those kind of general terms, and
right, Jennifer,
building on the work that's been done, but it needs to be expanded.
Question, please. We're talking in general terms here, Jennifer, about the very many different types of neurodivergent conditions.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, you types of, you've got acquired, you've got developmental, you've got mental health based. I mean, we defined this all back about 2005 with the DRC, and
Adrian, I think I'll
degenerative, you know.
I think I'll need to pass on to Dee now, but I think the point that you're making is really important, that maybe when we were thinking about certain types of neurodiversity in the past, we might have been thinking about one type. So we might have been designing a school or a health setting for a certain narrow type of neurodiversity. And I think hopefully we can kind of build on that knowledge, but realize that it has implications far more broadly to all settings.
Well, because for example, you know, as a brain injury survivor, and that's
because other people
root of mine.
Yeah, Adrian, I'll need to pass on to Dee now, but yeah, exactly.
I mean, the brain injury.
Adrian, can I ask my question now, please? Thank you. It's not well, it's a question, but it's also other things as well. It's interesting, Jennifer, you asked about, you know, how I would, you know, make my events accessible and things like that, because I do kind of worry as well that I want to try and cater for everybody, and then lots of people are going to feel like it's not going to work for them, and I kind of just, you know, wondered if you had any information more about, like, specifically how to make, you mentioned you had a slide on events and meetings and things, but I wondered if you had more details as part of your job about kind of how to make events, kind of festival type things as well, how to make them accessible and inclusive, and and how you cater for a lot of people. I mean, it's supposed to be a dyslexia event, but I know that, you know, maybe, or I'm hoping that, you know, other people with neurodivergent conditions will come, and, you know, how it will work for you know, such a wide range of people, really.
Yeah, Dee, I think let's maybe we'll pick this up because people probably want to have their dinner in another one of these sessions, but it seems to be a really important skill. We talk about advocacy, but we're kind of arranging events all the time. It made me think even about this presentation, and once you start trying to think about all of the sensory experience, it can seem quite overwhelming. But I think if you at least do the planning and ask a few people as a tester before you run it, it's going to make a big difference. So yeah, maybe we pick that up in another session. I think some of it from the people I was talking to was also just avoiding surprises, letting people know before they get there what's going to happen, making sure they feel comfortable when they're first there, and then trying to give them that sense of that there's a calm space. So even if you're trying to make it really active and engaging, there's still choice for people. A bit like Adrian said about the flexi plan idea, that you have kind of different spaces. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, and I see James has just put something about event guides
Brilliant,
in
James.
the chat. So thanks, James. Is James, isn't it? Jay Salisbury. Okay, I think so. Anyway, thank you, Jennifer and James. I think.
Okay, we have James. Can we have James as the last question? Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah. Okay. Briefly, yeah, I have put a link in for the Purple Guide. The Purple Guide is the HSE's guide on how to run large outdoor events, from anything from a small village fete to go and run Glastonbury. So it gives an idea of the various pointers. I was really following up from what Adrian was, and I would really suggest that Adrian may want to have a look at the works of Professor Amanda Kirby, because when you actually look at various neurodiversity types, and the employer doesn't know, and if an employer employers in the past have tried to pick apart my neurodiversity, and I quite bluntly have told them, kindly don't, because you're not qualified, you're not a psychologist, please don't. These are my needs. And actually, when you look at the needs of somebody who is autistic or somebody who is of senior years and may have various forms of dementia, you think about how can you reduce the need for working memory, and you look at it from that point of view for when you're addressing universal designs, rather than trying to do the very pigeonholed, because it's very hard work. And when you take a step back, there is a lot of overlap which can deal with. Also, Adrian is correct in terms of there can be clashes. I do know of a woman who has got lots of various needs, but also is allergic to dog hair. One of her colleagues is a guide dog user. Now, trying to see whose needs trumps who's in the office in that case is a little bit awkward. Equally, yes, I'm aware that some autistic people want quietness and all the rest of it, and particularly if they've got hyperacuity. Likewise, there are others who will try to seek out the loudest rock band that you can imagine. So you also have to be careful not to pigeonhole, but equally allow people chance to skip an event or skip parts of it, but try to
and they can be I mean, like dogs, no animal is allowed inside a true Orthodox church, right? Okay, so they have to be left at the door, and then someone will have to provide personal assistance from that point.
And actually, case in point with regards to dogs, I do know of a a Muslim guide dog user. Previously, people were saying, "Oh, the dog must be tied up outside. The dog is dirty, must never come in." Then there was the discussion point. Well, what about people in the dirty shoes? And then okay, the dog can come in. The dog has to stay in a dog crate in the cloakroom. I mean, it's called something else, but I'm talking in private. So how to actually think somewhat creatively about how accommodation can be obtained. So in that case, yes, the dog is kept safe, but the dog is not actually taken into the inner parts of the mosque. So all everybody's needs are then.
Yeah, well, I mean,
understood.
in our case, it couldn't even be the outer part. I mean, it could be just outside in for example, you know, I mean, that's but that's not the case with some other religious belief systems. It varies, but you know, the solution is that that the dog is left out.
So I'm going to
space,
have
and
to
then
cut
the
in.
personal
Sorry,
assistance is applied.
But thank you all, and there's lots of design knowledge in this group, and it's been really helpful today.
Okay.
But I think just to let people get their dinners, I'll pass back to Catherine, but I hope that we cover more on design in future sessions because it impacts so many areas of our life.
And how can we contact you?
On LinkedIn. Are you on LinkedIn?
I am a little bit, but are you on Twitter or
no? I find all of those ones baffling.
Or email?
Yes, I will put my email into the chat, or Catherine will pass it around when we hand out the recording. Adrian, I'll make sure that you've got my email.
Yeah, because we need to get some next generation people involved with the new Ainun Academy and what we're doing. Money we've got to spend at university, because I'm about the youngest and I'm 57. I think there's one guy younger actually.
Thank you, Adrian.
And thank you for all your messages, everyone.
We are going to wrap up now, and thank you so much, everybody. And thank you particularly to Jennifer for a stimulating presentation that created a huge amount of debate and getting loads and loads of claps. And Simon in the chat said he knows why this doesn't happen in the V&A, because there aren't enough senior people who are neurodivergent. So we're going to move on now. For me, just to tell you about the next talks. On the 25th of January, we've got a talk from Dispara about the amazing film for the Achievability Journal. And on the 22nd of February, we've got a talk by Nola Sterling, who works in criminal justice. So there's some really inspiring talks coming up. I'm going to stop the recording now.